Okay, it's 4 o'clock. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, it's 4 o'clock. We'll go ahead and start this meeting. Thank you all for being here. Karen, thank you for all the support and help that you have given this team. And with that, Brandon, can you go ahead and take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Ad Hoc Committee, Councilmember Richards, Councilmember Ferlito. We're also welcoming Councilmember Jeff Barron because this is a special meeting of the City Council. So welcome to Councilmember Barron. Tonight, what we're doing is we haven't had a public meeting in a little while because we have been in a period of waiting to receive a letter from the state, what we've been affectionately calling the 90-day letter. It's not a creative name, it's just how long they had to give us comments. So we got the 90-day letter. Staff has been able to spend a little bit of time. We just got it roughly a week ago or so. So staff has been able to spend a little bit of time with it, and we've distilled it down into some high-level, simple buckets of the type of comments we've received. So Marnie's going to run through that tonight. And really, we're looking for feedback from the Ad Hoc Committee, the City Council members that are here, and the community about our responses, because ultimately what we have to do is we have to take that letter and look at where they're saying this is a shall, this is a thing you have to do to your housing element based on state law or whatever. And here's some suggestions, some guidance on what we think would make your housing element even stronger than it already is. I want to start, giving kudos to the team here, the Ad Hoc Committee, the staff, Marnie and Catherine. For some context, the average length of these letters around the state is between 25 and 30 pages, very single spaced. Our letter was 9 pages. So I look at that as a victory. We still have a little bit of work to do, but it's a testament to the effort from the community, from the staff, from the council members that got us to this point. So with that, I'm going to stop blathering and hand it over to Marnie, who's got a wonderful presentation for us all this evening. Sure.
If you need to move to see the screen, feel free.
All right, well, good afternoon, and thank you everyone for coming out today to hear an update on our housing element project. So the agenda for this afternoon is to review the timeline, so how we got to this point today, talk about the mid-review revisions. So we had an opportunity at the 45-day mark to respond to some of the state's comments, and so I'll walk you through some of those. And then we're gonna summarize the letter for you. We've taken all the comments, as Brandon mentioned, and we've kind of grouped them into 3 categories just to try to make it easier to distill the information down. So we're gonna talk about housing types, housing sites, and then potential barriers to housing. Then we're going to talk a little bit about a new state law that has been passed. We'll tell you what the next steps are, and then we're just looking to get some feedback from you on these comments. So how we got to this point today, so we've been working on this project for over a year now. But we did have our first community meeting in November of 2022. So we've done a lot in this 1-year time frame. In August of this year, we had submitted our draft housing element to the state. And then we've been working with them through September, October, just to respond to questions and provide as much clarification as we can about, the uniqueness of Carmel. And then on November 1st, we got the official 90-day letter, which is what we're reviewing this afternoon. So I'm gonna start with the mid-review revisions. So the staff at the state level were kind enough to around the 45-day mark, meet with us and kind of give us some preliminary feedback on our document. So we had an opportunity to collaborate with them a little bit and respond to some of the initial comments that they were developing. Out of that conversation, staff did add 3 programs to the housing element. And these 3 programs are required by state law. And by addressing them at the mid-review, it meant that our letter at the 90-day review was just a little bit shorter. So I'm going to walk through those 3 programs. The first program is called Religious Institution Affiliated Housing Development. And as the title kind of explains, this is housing that is on religious institution property, but it does need to have an element of affordability. So this is a type of housing that can be streamlined, and the objective really is just to facilitate more affordable multifamily housing development. So if a religious institution is interested in developing housing, this law really supports their efforts in doing so. And it also relaxes some standards to help facilitate that redevelopment, such as not having to replace the parking that is currently on site. The next program that we added relates to unlicensed residential care facilities. So a residential care facility is a group home that provides supportive services to residents, but under this category, the services do not require a license under state law. The vast majority of residential care facilities are required to be licensed by the state of California. However, there are some circumstances in which a license is not required, and the state is looking to us to really still facilitate that type of housing because it provides a service to members of the community. So the objective of this program is to facilitate these unlicensed care facilities, and these are, again, facilities that don't require a license, and really the only example that I could find is a recovery residence or a sober living home. So this is just an environment where a group of people are living together, supporting each other, getting support from a professional, but again, just aren't required to have any licensure by the state. And then the last program that we added during the mid-review revisions relates to single-room occupancy units. And this is a type of affordable housing where the unit itself is typically between 200 to 350 square feet, and it's occupied by a single individual, and it's part of a larger multi-unit complex. So these are commonly seen in hotel conversions, sometimes become single-room occupancy units. And these units may have food prep facilities within each room, or they may not. There might be communal facilities. So again, just to comply with state law, our zoning code needs to have provisions for a variety of housing types, and this is one of those housing types. And we are required to allow them in all zones where residential uses are allowed. So the staff did prepare a reader's guide. It's dated October 17th, and it provides a summary of all the mid-review revisions that were prepared and submitted to the state. You can find this on our website. It is in a red line track changes format, so you can easily see what has changed from when we originally submitted in August to this version. So moving on to a review of the letter. I think as many of you know, but in case you don't, HCD stands for Housing and Community Development. And I'm gonna say HCD or state, and I'm kind of referring to this, this particular department. So we've taken the letter and we've developed 3 categories of comments from the letter. The first category is going to be housing types. So one of the objectives of the housing element is to encourage a variety of housing types so that people that have different income levels or different needs within the community have options. The next category is housing sites. So you may recall, we received our regional housing needs allocation. It's 349 new units over the next 8 years. So the housing sites, we identified the potential where new housing could be located. So we're going to talk a little bit about the state's comments regarding our sites. And then the last category is potential barriers to the development of housing. So this is really just looking at our zoning code, looking at our procedures and seeing if there's anything in there that might be hindering the development of housing and how we might be able to change that to facilitate more housing units. So the first housing type is emergency shelters. And this is, again, something that came out of state law. This is Assembly Bill 2339 from 2022. And what this bill requires is that we expand our definition of emergency shelters to include interim interventions such as navigation centers, bridge housing, and respite or recuperative care. We also need to amend the zoning code to allow emergency shelters by right in zoning districts where residential uses are allowed. And again, that term by right, we use that a lot. That simply means that we don't require that they get a conditional use permit. So it's just allowed by right. And then if we identify any specific sites for emergency shelters, they must be located near amenities and services that serve the homeless population. So while the city of Carmel's documented homeless population at the last count was 1 individual, this doesn't necessarily apply to us today. But we do need to amend our zoning code and kind of establish that framework that should the need arise in the future, we have the regulations in place that comply with state law to meet that need. The next housing type is agricultural employee housing. And this, again, like the title kind of gives away, this is housing opportunities for farm workers. So state law does require that we amend our zoning code to expressly permit employee housing of 6 or fewer employees as a single family use. So it wouldn't be treated any different than a typical single family home. The law goes a little bit further to say that employee housing of up to 12 units or 36 beds can only be regulated in the same manner as agricultural uses. Well, we don't have any agricultural uses in Carmel, so this doesn't apply to us. But because it's in the state law, HCD wants us to respond to this particular comment, which we absolutely will do. The next housing type is permanent supportive housing, and this housing type is linked to services for low-income persons with 1 or more disabilities. And the objective here again is providing housing opportunities with support services for special needs groups. So HCD is looking to us to amend the zoning code to allow this type of housing by right in multifamily and mixed use zoning districts. And you can see the government code section here referenced where this requirement comes from. This is really consistent with the theme that the state has been promoting about trying to just streamline processes and just make it a little bit easier for a variety of housing types to be established within various communities. So now we're moving on to housing sites. and some of the comments surrounding the sites that we identified for potential future housing. And I'm gonna start with the city-owned sites, which are Sunset Center, the north parking lot, and the south parking lot, as well as our Vista Lobos facility. So the objective here in identifying these locations really was to facilitate affordable housing. In a community where the lot sizes are really small and developments are a smaller scale, it's really difficult for developers to build affordable housing in a manner that's financially feasible. But in this case, you know, the city owns some sites that are a little bit on the larger side, and we really could, you know, have a positive impact in providing affordable housing on these sites. So we proposed this to the state, and their response was, we need to do a little bit more analysis. So we need to evaluate the current status of each of these sites. We need to identify what steps we would go through to get an affordable housing project entitled and issue building permits. Identify any potential barriers that might exist to developing these sites. Evaluate how the existing parking needs will be met while the property is redeveloping, and then provide a schedule of actions. So, you know, timing for outreach with developers, when we would issue a request for proposals for a project, any incentives that we might offer, and so forth, as you see on the slide here. So this one is going to require a little bit of additional work, just really to show the state that we're serious about considering these sites for future housing. The next grouping of housing sites has to do with our hospitality employee housing program. So this was a really creative program that was developed, you know, through this process with the ad hoc housing committee, where the local hotels could provide, you know, 1 or 2 or even more on-site housing units for their employees in exchange for maybe some additional hotel rooms. So HCD was, you know, open to, you know, creative ideas, but they do want us to do some additional analysis, including really discussing the potential for the hotels participating in this program, if there's been any recent development trends that would support a program such as this, whether there's local interest in the program. And then they also want us to include a program to evaluate how effective the program is. So at some point we need to kind of be a little bit retrospective and see, you know, is the program effective? And if it's not progressing as we anticipate, then developing some alternative actions to provide that housing in a different manner. And it's a very similar analysis that HCD is asking us to do for the hotel transfer of development rights. So this is a program where, you know, an existing hotel might allow their property to redevelop for housing and then take their hotel units and, you know, develop a hotel on an alternative site. So the state's looking for us to do the very same analysis to really vet whether there's interest in the community in pursuing these programs. And then with all of our potential housing sites, so we did identify a total of 28 properties. And some of those properties are just indicative of a type of property that could redevelop. So there's certainly other opportunities that exist. But for the sites that we identify, the state wants us to really think about what potential site constraints might preclude development of those sites. So are they, you know, an irregular shape? Do they have appropriate access? Is the site contaminated with hazardous materials? What are the title conditions? Are there any easements? Are they historic properties? And then this one about relocation of existing uses is kind of a really important one because, you know, as a developed village, you know, there are businesses that are on, you know, these properties that we've identified as potential housing sites. So really kind of thinking about, is it realistic that their business would be able to relocate to facilitate redevelopment of that property?
Marnie, would it be okay if I jump in and add a little color to a couple slides? So I think it's important to note here for the ad hoc committee and Councilmember Barron and for the community that these couple of slides that Marnie was talking about, essentially the state wanting to see more of our homework or showing our work a little bit better. It's not like we didn't turn in these constraints. We just, the state says we just want to see more analysis, more homework. For example, the city-owned properties, I think we assumed because we have complete control over those properties, maybe we didn't have to show so much homework that we have control over those properties, but they want to see more rationalization, more data on that stuff. And same thing with the last slide that Marnie was just showing. We showed them what we think the major constraints are, but they picked out some specific ones that we didn't discuss and said, just talk about these constraints too, like contamination. I mean, that's going to be an easy one for the most part. So there's things that I think they just have a checklist that they looked at and said, you know, didn't talk about these constraints. So I just wanted to pepper that in there. So thanks for indulging me, Marnie.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because as staff was working with our partners at EMC and going through this exercise, we did look at some of these things. So they are, you know, we are aware of them. We certainly don't want to propose, you know, a property that is a historic site that we know there's no room for housing. Like, that just doesn't make sense. And so I think we need to kind of show the state what our thought process was in selecting the sites that we did. So this is just a summary, just a little refresher of what we're planning towards. So the top row here is our regional housing needs allocation. So we're planning for 349 units. At this stage, we have proposed a capacity of 405, so 56 more than what is required. And then you can see the individual breakdowns in the income categories. We have a surplus in all of them except for the very low. And this is pretty common. The very low income category is the most challenging for communities to really plan for. And it does usually require some pretty heavy subsidy to accomplish. The lower half of this chart kind of breaks down the number of housing units by program that we're proposing. So what we anticipate the capacity being on the city-owned sites versus the other sites which are under private ownership, what we're estimating over the 8-year period for ADUs. I'm pretty confident we can exceed this number just based on current interest, and certainly if additional, you know, water resources come online. We're just seeing a lot of kind of positive responses to ADUs. So we're projecting 40 over the next 8 years. We've set a goal for 31 hospitality employee housing units. So certainly we're gonna, you know, be doing some robust outreach to the hotels. And with the Pine Inn kind of stepping up and already proposing to really embrace this concept is really encouraging. And then this last one, the TDRs, is that transfer of development rights. So now I'm going to move into a summary of potential barriers. And again, these are barriers to the development of housing. So with respect to residential care facilities, our zoning code currently addresses these. These are group homes licensed and regulated by the state of California. The state is just looking for us to look at our process, which requires a conditional use permit, analyze the findings for a use permit, and see if it is if it's causing a constraint on the establishment of residential care facilities. So a little bit more analysis on that. The next potential barrier is regarding reasonable accommodation. So in 2011, the City Council did adopt a reasonable accommodation policy. And this was something that came out of state law in prior housing element cycles. And really what it is, it's a policy where persons with disabilities can request relaxation of rules, policies, practices, certain zoning development standards in order to ensure that they continue to have adequate access to their housing, even when faced with, having to navigate a disability. The city has received applications for these accommodations, and we have approved them over the years. What the state is asking us to do is just to reevaluate our policy and remove any subjectivity from the review and approval process. So creating just more certainty for applicants that when they request that accommodation, that it's likely to be granted. And then also analyzing the appeal process. If an approval or a denial, we need to go through that process. The next potential barrier that was identified has to do with our design study, design review process, and our findings for approval. So the state is asking us to analyze those findings to see if they are causing a constraint on housing. And on this one, we are looking at, we have a program in our housing element to develop these objective design and development standards for affordable housing projects. And that really kind of achieves what I think the state is speaking to with regards to findings for approval. So we foresee that being changed with the development of the odds. So we're not too concerned about that comment.
Marnie, just for a minute, the council just recently approved acceptance of the REAP grant. And the REAP grant is something that will pay for us to develop those standards. So we received that, we will receive that in order to be able to accomplish that process.
Yes.
So that's helpful.
That's very helpful. I think it's $80,000 or $85,000. So the next potential barrier that the state identified is our story pole policy. And this policy was actually formalized in 2017. And it requires the installation of story poles and netting for design study or design review applications. These really assist both staff and decision makers when evaluating the height, the bulk, the mass of a project. The state thinks that this could be a potential barrier, just sort of an extra layer, an extra step that developers have to go through. And so they want us to analyze our policy and consider maybe even eliminating it if we do find that it is a constraint. So we'll be doing some additional analysis on that.
Marnie, can I jump in on this one too?
Yes.
Add a little salt and pepper because I love my food analogies. So on this one specifically, this is a good example of comments from the state where we feel like we need to explain to them a little better why we have a story pole policy. We have a local coastal program in place that talks about views, both public and private. That's our adopted LCP under the California Coastal Act. And there is language in all of the housing element law that talks about the balance of the Coastal Act and your LCP versus the housing element law that's being sent down. So on things like this, where we need some way to analyze impacts to views, which are adopted in our LCP through the Coastal Commission and under the California Coastal Act, we look at these as more of an explanation to the state as to why we do this, and how there may not be a better mechanism to assess those view impacts, because perhaps you could do 3D digital rendering of a view impact, but that's never going to be as good as a physical representation of that view impact. So some of these comments, like this one, where it's not a state law necessarily, what we're going to be doing is talking about how can we better explain the rationale for why we're doing it. We're not doing story poles to prevent housing. we're doing story polls to honor and protect our local coastal program and the California Coastal Act. So we'll have some of these items along the way. And this is the kind of feedback, we're hoping to get, from the steering committee, the ad hoc committee and Councilmember Barron and the community tonight regarding stuff like this. So I'm kind of teeing that up. This is our thought when we see that, how we might respond to a comment like this. Thanks, Marnie.
And just to add, just for a second, it could be that we wouldn't eliminate story polls, but the timing of them, maybe only after an application is deemed complete would story polls be required. So story polls wouldn't go up and then get changed and have to go up again or be modified and so on, so that it would...
We may find ways to make it less onerous
Yes.
to have to put up story polls, but maybe not necessarily completely doing away with the requirement.
Right.
So these are the conversations we need to have.
The next, excuse me. The next potential barrier is permit fees. And again, this one is just kind of universal. Any fee is really seen as a constraint on housing. But the state did identify that our permit fees for multifamily housing seem to be a bit high when compared to single family. So they'd like us to analyze the fees a little bit more closely and see if they might be potentially hindering the supply or affordability of housing. And then, depending on the outcome of that analysis, include a program to address permit fees. Okay, so this is the last barrier, and it deals with infrastructure constraints. So the state is looking for some additional analysis from the city that we have sufficient total dry utility capacity for our regional housing needs. So this is basically gas and electric service to serve new housing units. And then also providing a timeline for implementation of our proposed program about prioritizing water distribution for affordable housing. And that's kind of been a theme to this cycle with HCD, are these discrete timelines, really getting local cities and counties to think about what steps need to be taken and how much time needs to be invested to carry out some of these programs. So that's kind of what this discrete timeline refers to. I'm going to touch now really briefly on Senate Bill 423, which was signed in October of this year. This is very closely related to Senate Bill 35, which has been around for a little while now, and it involves streamlining the process for reviewing and approving multifamily affordable housing. So SB 423 created some additional standards layered on top of what SB 35 originally had, and it still applies. But basically what Senate Bill 423 is saying is that these streamlined ministerial processes are going to now apply to all cities and counties that do not meet their RENA requirements, or if they failed to obtain HCD certification of their housing element. So some jurisdictions opt to adopt their housing element but not get state certification. And so the state is saying, if you take that approach, you will absolutely be subject to these streamlining provisions. It also expands this streamlined process to projects within the coastal zone. So previously we were exempt from SB 35 because we are wholly within the coastal zone. However, SB 423 now says that certain areas within the coastal zone are now subject to the streamlined process. So these areas cannot be located in fire risk zones, floodplains, or protected habitat. So that hasn't changed. And there's also a provision that says that existing rental units cannot be demolished. The law also specifies that developers have to submit a notice of intent that they're going to submit an application for this streamlining process. So basically giving the local jurisdiction a heads up that they're going to pursue this streamlined provision. So a property that might fall under the provisions of this law, it has to be zoned for multifamily housing. So this does not affect any of our single-family properties. The project must deed restrict 10% of the rental units for very low-income households, and that deed restriction needs to be in place for 55 years. So this really, it has to have an affordable housing component. It has to comply with objective design and development standards, and that compliance is determined by the planning director. We also must engage in tribal consultation as part of the process. And while the Planning Commission or a design review board can have some oversight, they are not the final approving body. So that authority is given to the planning director. And then a couple other provisions: the developer has to pay prevailing wage if there's more than 10 units. And the provisions of these bills have been extended to 2036. Okay, timeline. So throughout the month of November, we're going to continue to collaborate with HCD on the comments. We do have a meeting scheduled with them just to get some clarifications. We will revise the document and take that to the City Council for feedback. December 15th remains the deadline for certification. And while there's just simply not enough time to achieve that, because once we resubmit to the state, they need 60 days to review our revisions. There is a 120-day grace period baked into the process for us to achieve certification and remain in good standing, and we think we'll be done well in advance of that. So that's the April 15th date. And then implementation over the next 8 years. So we just want you to stay engaged. If you haven't already done so, please sign up for the listserv. Please subscribe to the City Administrator's Friday letter. We will send out updates and notifications of future meetings. And this is your Housing Ad Hoc Committee and team. Again, we just thank you for coming out tonight. I think that does conclude my presentation. We'd love to get any feedback that you have on the HCD comments or any of the topics that we have highlighted tonight.
Thank you, Marnie. That was an excellent presentation. And thank you everyone for bearing with us. We know these presentations are often long, but there's a lot going on in these. And so kudos to Marnie for distilling that down to only 30 minutes, because that could have been a 3-hour presentation, to be honest. So Ad Hoc Committee, Councilmember Barron, we would, I guess we turn it over to you. Our suggestion would be for the Ad Hoc Committee and Councilmember Barron to start kind of like we do in a public hearing, ask questions, any clarifying questions, and then perhaps go out to the community and see if there's any feedback, and then come back to you all for thoughts and direction based on what you've seen. So it's up to you, though. That's just a staff suggestion.
Well, perfect, Brandon. Thank you. Marnie, the residents, I want you to understand we really wanted to try to get to that December 15th deadline. We just simply don't have the capacity to do it. We've thrown every manpower out there that we could possibly do. We're even considering hiring a temporary person to come on board to try to get us to that. But I just don't think it's possible to get it to December 15th. That's why it was so important that we tried to turn this in as early as we did, and we didn't run up against that deadline, because we knew that there was going to be some time for the state to look it over and then give us feedback. And so unfortunately, we probably will not get to that December 15th, but I want you to know that this staff is trying as hard as they possibly can to get there. With that, I have a question, Marnie. On slide number 7, when we talked about the single room occupancy, would JADUs apply to that? Could we tell the state, hey, we have some JADUs coming in and put them in that box? And for those of you that don't know what a JADU is, Brandon, can you explain it, please?
Sure, yeah, and I might even be able to start an answer on that one. Marnie can look at me and tell me I'm wrong if I say the wrong thing. But a JADU is related to an ADU. It's basically the little sibling of an ADU. So a JADU is wholly contained within the footprint of an existing building. It's 500 square feet or less. It does not have to have its own bathroom. It can share a bathroom with the main house. So you'd have a door going out of the JADU into the main dwelling, so it's like a shared facility, but it does need to have its own exterior door. So it's like you convert a bedroom into an apartment, basically, that still shares facilities with the house. It has to be 500 square feet or less, though. To the question about whether or how those relate to single room occupancy units or SROs, SROs are really about being within a multi-unit complex. So think of like a hotel or an apartment building where you have one room essentially that's like, your classic old hotel where you have your room, but you have to go out in the hallway and go down to go to the bathroom. That's more of an SRO. It's less than 350 square feet, and it's just a place to live, but it only counts within, apartment complex, a hotel. So our JADUs wouldn't fall under that unless it was a JADU that was put inside of, like an apartment complex or.
What about
like
the hotel program that we came up with? Wouldn't those qualify for JADUs?
For SROs?
Yes.
Yeah, it could because it's in a multi-family, multi-unit building, right, Marnie?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because they're a type of multifamily housing. So it's sort of like a group living situation where each person does have their own unit. So I would have to look at the definition a little bit closer. I don't think this was intended to be individual units, sprinkled throughout the community, but rather the traditional example is a multifamily, multi-unit complex.
Maybe think more like a dormitory complex where you have these rooms, but there's like shared facilities. There's a shared kitchen, there's a shared bathroom, but each space is a place where someone can live.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just one of many, housing types to plan for. Not all of these housing types might fit within our community. But certainly, if we set the stage for this and a developer approaches us and wants to convert a hotel, then we have the regulations in place to be able to facilitate that.
Okay, thank you, Marnie. Karen, did you have any?
Yeah, I think that, at first, it's a confusing type of facility, but I can think of on San Carlos Street that used to be a convalescent home. It's in the mid-block area between 7th and 8th on the west side. And I don't know whether those have individual kitchens at this point or individual bathrooms, because at one time it was a convalescent home. I do know there are living facilities there. So it might bear looking into what is that facility right now? How is it functioning? Would it meet this definition? So, this is one of the examples of we need to do a little more analysis of what exists to see if we might even have one of these already. Some developers that we saw examples of at the AIA meetings earlier this year, particularly in Los Angeles, have built places that have shared communal kitchens. And that way they don't have to have a kitchen in every single room. People have their individual space for their privacy, but they live in a little bit more communal fashion. And some people actually really like that type of environment. So,
Mr. Barron?
More analysis.
Thank you. So thanks, Marnie, for the presentation, and Marnie and Brandon and Bobby and Karen, of course, thank you for the tremendous amount of work that you've done. I have 2 questions. AB 2244, the religious institution, So is part of that law that the religious institution has to stay? So, like Church of the Wayfarer. Is the law that the Church of the Wayfarer can build property on Church of the Wayfarer property, or that they can raise their church and then take advantage of this law to build housing on the church property?
Like, and then basically
So-
sell the entitlement.
Can they sell the entitlement, basically, can
Not
they
be
sell
a
the
church
entitlement
anymore.
and not be a church anymore, and the property is then sort of
question.
grandfathered into 2244, or does the church have to stay?
Under 2244, it has to stay because the housing is considered an accessory use.
So a church with a parking lot could use their parking lot for housing, but they can't use the church for housing because
And make
then the church
go
would
away.
disappear.
Yeah, right. Great question.
And then on AB, whatever the last number was,
423.
423, at the beginning, Karen, do you remember what slide it is? I wrote mine.
24, slide 24.
Oh,
Page
It was
13.
on the right page. So on the slide 24, it says, applies to cities and housings that fail to meet their RENA requirements or fail to obtain HCD certification. So the things that you listed on slides 24 and 25, those are all consequences of not meeting their RENA requirements. So if we meet our RENA requirement, do any of the other things on these slides apply to us? So to just use one as an example, cannot demolish rental units. So if we meet our RENA requirements, then a developer can demolish a rental unit. Do you, I'm not sure I'm phrasing the
No, I
question
see.
right.
You-
But a
me to
better
do it?
one is, must comply with objective design and development standards. So like that only applies if we don't, that only applies if SB 423 kicks in, right? And if we meet our RENA requirements either at the beginning or as we go along, then none of the things from SB 423 apply, correct?
Yes. So when a developer comes in under SB 423 to propose a project, their project has to meet all of those standards. But if we are compliant with our regional housing needs, then we're not subject to the streamlined
423.
process.
Yeah, so it's not
To
like
any
these-
of SB
that's right.
423.
These don't flip and become the converse, they just go away altogether. So these are the requirements for a project to meet SB 423, if we're subject to it.
Okay, thank you.
Good question, Jeff. Okay, how about we open it up to the public? Would anybody like to get anything clarified, ask any questions,
So,
offer
Councilmember
solutions?
Richards, as someone's coming up, I just want to make the same announcement that I did at the Planning Commission. Feel free to come up, but I just want to make the same announcement. So we are going to take comments via Zoom tonight as well. The Brown Act requires comments to be taken on subject matter that is within the jurisdiction of the body that you're talking to. So for example, the jurisdiction of this body is the housing element and all things housing, and to some extent also the business of the city. However, the Brown Act does not require public comments to be taken for things that are completely outside of the jurisdiction or power of a body. For example, you can tell this body that I hate housing, I hate the housing element, I hate how you're running these meetings, that's all fine. You cannot tell this body you hate people or a certain class of people or anything like that. So basically what I'm saying is we don't allow for hate speech as part of these comments. So when we do get to Zoom comments or here in the chambers, when we do get to Zoom comments, if anyone decides that that's how they want to spend their comment time, that will be immediately muted and no longer able to speak on the matter because they've given up their rights under the Brown Act. That's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. Ellen Gannon, Chair of Sustainable Carmel. It's nice to be here in person. This is sort of an overall view of something, because I've been aware in the last couple of years with studies that have been done on the air pollution in this area. And the two biggest polluters are the ag industry and people having to drive to their job because they can't live within close proximity to. So the ag one doesn't affect you. However, I just wanted to put that piece in the mix. because we have a lot of people who commute to work in the shops and the restaurants and the hotels here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Nancy Toomey, thank you all for everything you do. I have a whole bunch of comments, and I'll just flip through my pages as Marnie and all you guys were speaking. And if you wanted to answer, fine. If you want to,
You know what we'll do, Nancy, is ask the questions, because we're going to try to hold it to the 3 minutes.
Okay.
And then we
All
can
right,
answer them
all
at the end.
right. So question was, there was the proposal on the front page of the Pine Cone with regard to the north lot. That was kind of a transom toss. Don't know when that's in the mix and relevant to this whole discussion. So that's just an open item. Obviously, the Red Cross building has subsequently been purchased, and so that's no longer relevant in our site listing, I believe, but you tell me. Wanted to know if it sounded like you clarified that we're not going to continue to use EMC as a part of continuing to develop our materials. So I see a head shaking there. Okay, pages. Okay, so I'm on page 10. So this was housing types, emergency shelters, and I guess, that confuses me, given the size of our town. Don't know what is envisioned along those lines. So it would be nice to just hear ideas or thoughts with regard to what emergency shelters could be in a town that's our size and use overall. Let's see. The next one was, okay, I got that. Okay. In the, on page 18, the licensed residential care facilities, does this account for, in the model where you might have, a mother or an aunt or a family member that is disabled and or in their waning years, does this count for that alignment in this residential care facilities? Because a lot of people obviously care for relatives as they're aging, and don't know if that has any applicability to this particular licensed residential care facilities. On page 19, does this reasonable accommodations for handicap or lack of physical capabilities, does this include approvals for things like elevators and ramps as an example of those types of things? So just looking for clarification. Karen, you mentioned about a grant that was approved, but there's an acronym in there that I still have not been able to understand what that acronym is. So I'm looking for the name of that acronym. And then say the fees for 2I. Okay, got it. That's just my clarification, and I know my time is up.
It's okay now. I mean, if you have a couple
but
more.
I'm real close here. Okay, no, that's my clarification. Okay, so then on the timeline, obviously we're not going to make the 15th, and in the 120-day grace period, you call out that's where we need to get all of our homework done and fully approved, I'm assuming? Yes, fully approved. So obviously we need to get it to them well in advance of the 120 days to get the hopeful rubber stamp at the end of that 120 days. And that's what we're shooting for. Okay, that's it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
What is the name of that grant?
REAP grant. We
Spell.
had REAP.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Richards and Ferlito, would you like us to answer questions after people come up? That's up to you.
I think with this size audience, I think that would be probably okay if we
Okay.
could get those answered
Okay.
right away, because maybe it'll.
Sure. Yeah, maybe someone else has the same question. Okay,
yeah.
well, let me try to run down the list, and
Okay.
Marnie, if I miss something,
Okay.
you let me know. So the Red Cross sold, I don't know if that sale's been finalized, I'm aware of the conversations, but can we still use it as a site? Sure.
It doesn't have to be taken
Just
off.
because somebody else owns it doesn't take it off the list. It's still, because remember, what we're doing is we're relying on private development.
To do that.
So I think
yeah.
that still keeps it on the list. EMC is absolutely still being used. I apologize if we said something that made it sound like that, but EMC is still our partner in this. You mentioned licensed residential care facilities, but actually if you look at the title of it, believe it or don't, it's unlicensed residential care facilities.
Okay, sorry.
So it's a very small niche. And so like when you're talking about care for relatives, loved ones that need that care, those are actually licensed facilities. Those are a whole nother set. So there's actually Marnie and I spent some time trying to figure out what an unlicensed care facility might look like. And it's a pretty small niche of things. Like an example is a recovery or sober living type of home. Those don't require state licenses, believe it or not. So that's just an example, but it's actually unlicensed care facilities. Your question about what reasonable accommodations was, yes, that does include elevators, staircases, when they may not fit into our typical development pattern. And we have that program right now. We offer reasonable accommodations if you need to put a wheelchair lift in the setback. As long as we can safely get around the building, we can make those reasonable accommodations right now, even outside of the housing element. The 120-day grace period, yes, you're correct. That is, we have that time to get our homework done and get it certified by the state. Like Marnie said and Councilmember Richards said, we're very confident we're going to do that. We're very far along in the process, and based on the comments we received from the state, I think we can rise to that. I am worried about some of our partner cities who still haven't even submitted their housing element, but that's their planning director's nightmare, not mine. So,
Yeah. And we thank you for that.
and then the last one is REAP. The acronym,
Yeah.
I thought I was going to get 10 out of 10 on this, Marnie. What does REAP stand for?
I can tell you.
Oh, thank you.
It's the Regional Early Action Planning Grants Program.
Good job.
And the REAP grants, there were competitive grants that people who, like Watsonville is going to build a affordable housing unit over their transit center. Monterey just got a very large grant under the competitive grant because they are going to build multifamily housing behind City Hall. And I think there's one other city got a very competitive grant. The rest of the cities within the AMBAG region, the money that came from the state for this planning was divided up depending on size of the community and number of housing that you were required to give. But ours happens to be $85,000, which we decided to put towards developing those objective design standards, because those objective design standards are going to be very, very important to us, because they will provide a checklist which makes affordable housing a little more certain for developers. If they check all the boxes, they get approval. So developing those to what we want is our way of steering the development that comes into our community under that kind of program. So it's really going to be important.
Thanks, good
How
knowledge.
about you, Nancy?
Karen.
Did we get all of them? All right. Okay. Looks like we have another public comment.
Yes, sir. Mark Stillwell, hotel owner in Carmel. We also have a residential rental here where our two managers live, walking distance from the hotels. So it's kind of a nice, synergy there.
We didn't know that.
Yeah, down near the Mission on San Carlos. So,
Okay.
and they often walk to work or bike to work, or my question is, it relates back, and I hate to reopen a subject, but a few years back we converted 44 permanent housing units, apartments and condominiums into short-term rentals. And I wonder if the state, or if that could be undone somehow, or put a limit, if you could get credit with a stroke of a pen by bringing back 44 units that are now essentially hotel units, even though we have a cap on hotel units in Carmel. I could not add, even doing a multi-million-dollar renovation, I couldn't add a single hotel unit to my complex, and yet 44 apartments and condos were converted to de facto hotel units. And I think this housing crisis, and it probably was back then, but it wasn't front page news. I doubt that decision would have been made today, because you wouldn't be allowed, you're not allowed to demolish a housing unit, but 44 were converted and to essentially hotel units, and tenants, long-term employees and workforce housing went away. And it's always troubled me, and now that it's kind of much in the news, I was thinking, can the city, with the stroke of a pen in a program, claw those back and just return them to what, there's no housing, there's no environmental impacts other than positive ones. So that's my comment and thought for the day.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
I think, Brandon, I think I can answer or help with this one because I was part of the council during that. I think there's 18 permits, right? Or is there 44?
It's funny, I actually just looked it up today. There's 41.
There is 41, okay.
Yeah.
And so that, we tried to stop it. We had to stop that right away, right? Because these people had permits, right? They bought property. They came to the city. They said, can I do this? The city said yes and gave them a permit. And then once we found out this was happening, then we stopped it. But there was a lot of debate. The gentleman on my right was trying, had an idea to prorate them out, and then there was other people on the council, me being one of them, that believed in property rights, and I said, no, all we're gonna do is get a lot of lawsuits, because people had the permits. The city said you could do it, gave them the permits, and there were 2 other people on council that felt the same way I did, and so that's what happened. So we stopped it, and we kind of just stopped the bleeding at that point. And so I don't think
I argued at the time, how are these not subject to the cap on hotel rooms, which
well, it was because it was
never
short-term
been allowed
rental.
under that.
It was in the downtown area, right? It was in the downtown area, so that's how it. There was kind of a loophole in our code, and they found it and they got it, and we stopped it as quick as we could. But I think that if we would have prolonged it and said, I think we would have been in a lawsuit. It would still be going on.
Possibly, but I still think, things have changed, right?
Yeah.
Housing is critical, and just something worth looking at, I think, and maybe have county council or city council, take a look and see if there's anything you can do, because I knew people who were displaced, and it was kind of it was a shame.
It was awful. It was awful, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, anybody else? Don't be shy. We don't have.
So we're looking in the room right now. Don't worry, folks on Zoom, we'll get to you. We're going to let the folks in the room go first.
Hello, Linda Calafiore. I'm usually not one to look back at all. I always like to look ahead, but I certainly agree with the past comment. I was a little distressed when a lot of those rental units were taken off the market. But that's not what I came up here for. I came up here to talk about the Scout House, which I've mentioned a few times in public meetings. And again, I realize I'm probably late to the program, but that is, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a city-owned property, and it just sits there. And I don't understand why that wasn't listed as an available parcel, why it's not available for development. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Brandon, you want to?
Sure, I can start, and Marnie can jump in there. So as Marnie pointed out in her presentation, we had a mandate of 349 units. We actually, at the guidance of the state, they're asking everyone to basically create a contingency. So we actually shot over that already. So we used the units that we saw as potentially the most developable as that list, knowing that we still maybe have some in our back pocket, like the Scout House. The Scout House has unique challenges with accessibility for that lower floor. The same things we saw plague the conversation with the Scouts and others that were trying to respond to the RFP. It's a difficult site to develop. So it's not totally off the table. No, it's not on our inventory list, but we have more, essentially, to put it simply, we have more than we need already on our list. So I guess that's the answer, unless you want to add any salt or pepper to that.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the reasons we try to avoid all of the known historic properties.
Good point.
So anything that's a listed historic resource, it just adds another layer of constraint to navigate when talking about redevelopment or even conversion of the building to housing. So our first attempt was to try to get to the 349 with as few site constraints as possible.
Thank you.
May I ask a question on that? If the Scout House were moved, the physical building were moved to another site in the city, because someone has suggested moving it to the parking lot of Sunset Center, could we then use the land once the historical building was moved?
Sure,
We could
yes.
put that on our inventory.
Yes.
Could we move it to Rio Park?
No, it's not floodplain.
And can't do it in the floodplain, that's right.
Is there anybody else? Please step up and kind of eliminate our travel time.
Yeah. Hello. As you know, I'm not all that shy about talking here. So my question, I don't know how you'd answer it. Or,
Would you mind saying your name, sir?
Oh, Chris Mack?
I know who you are, but thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thank you for reminding me. Parking and how that operates into the constraints or the development of these sites. You know, being a builder in this area for quite a while, I've noticed that a lot of people, most people don't use their garages or even their driveways for parking. And I know we have a parking element in the normal housing approval process. And my suggestion would be to minimize that parking commitment on a developer, and just think of it as more like, let's get housing for people and not worry so much about the cars. I don't think, we put a lot of importance on cars in this area, and I'd like to start minimizing the car thing. And because we're looking, you know, from my looking into the future, and I'm talking, you know, maybe 10 to 50 years down the road, what are cars going to look like? Are we going to have autonomous cars, like in the Uber thing, where you just go, oh, I need a car, I want to go to the movie. And you don't even really need a car that much. So I ask you guys to look at that. I don't know the answer as far as parking as it pertains to this subject. And so that's part of my question. Thank you.
Marnie, do you want to talk to that at all?
What to say? We already have reduced parking requirements for senior housing and affordable housing, and it's certainly something that the state encourages us to do as well, because parking really does add cost to new development.
And Marnie, is that in the existing program, or that's in our proposed program for this housing element update? The reduced parking requirements for senior housing, and
It's already in our zoning code.
thank you.
Yeah.
And we're not currently proposing any additional parking reductions, right?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Non-senior.
Yeah, I think that's a good
Yes.
comment, so we took note of that. Thank you. Yeah.
Actually, currently, yeah, affordable housing has a lower parking requirement than market rate housing. And actually, we do have a program. For some reason, there's a difference in the parking standards between the, it's like the SC and the RC. So we're gonna reevaluate our parking table and just kind of get all of our parking standards aligned so that by zoning district, it's the same, because right now it's not.
Okay. Is there anybody else? Donna, please come up.
I'm Donna Jett, and I'm like Linda, late to the game, but I am so impressed with what you people have done. Beyond impressed. One of the items that I had a question about is Section 8. Santa Monica and a lot of them have Section 8 housing, which it means it's subsidized for the low income, particularly the disabled, because that's something I don't know if this is at all in the consideration. And is there a map of the city that shows that identifies all of these locations that you're talking about for the 394? And I'm with Linda that you could tear down that Scout House and put multi in there. And there's not a developer in the world who couldn't do that based on if it's straight up a mountain. Come on, guys. We've been to Aspen. That, because it's an uphill grade, is not a problem for developers. I'm still impressed with your group, and you did answer Rio Park, why you can't build on it. And Flanders would make a great place for a group home, but the neighbors would never allow sober living or recovering people in it. It should be torn down and made into a park, a beautiful park, all of parkland. That's my idea on that. I've been to so many in 25 years meetings on Flanders, and we voted to sell it, and my vote didn't count on that one either. But I guess a map of where these units are going, because I'm in the dark about where you think they're going, and Section 8, I don't know if that's doable or even on the map, and the consequences. I know in Beverly Hills, a few months ago in the paper, they were sued by 2 nonprofits who read their plan and said it was a joke. It was just a joke, and they were suing 2 nonprofits that do housing. So I assume when you send in your plan, there's a map that goes with it that identifies actual property, be it the parking lot or be it anything you own or don't own.
I think we can answer that pretty quickly. Brandon, Marty?
Yeah, sure. We have a really, I think, amazing website for this housing opportunities made easy home. We nicknamed our site, and there's a fabulous map on there that shows all this stuff. It's in the housing element. The housing element requires you to have a map that's showing on that. So if you go on our website, you can find that, and if you can't find it, contact us. We'll help you find it.
And one more comment: a neighbor's building a new house, which I heartily approve. Why can't, and the lot's pretty good size, where he could have a lock unit, a door, a separate door, that you don't give him a little bit more square footage. Doesn't mean a mansion, but that he could put a rental unit or a mother-in-law unit, not have to be separate as the ADU is. And those are big all over, that people have the attached granny unit, including in
That's
PG.
It's a good idea.
That there's a few more feet given to that. And thank you. You guys are doing great.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Okay, if there's nobody here, we're going to go out to Zoom.
There was a couple more questions I'll just answer really quickly, because I think Donna wants to tear down the Scout House and Flanders Mansion. But the answer to both of those is they're both historic properties. So that was kind of what Marty was talking about earlier. So we got the historic property issue. But you're right, though, like the consequences of not doing it seriously, other jurisdictions have experienced that, which is why we've put so much effort into this over the last year. And when our housing element draft went out to the state, it's also out in the public for publishing. And we didn't hear, to my knowledge, any of those watchdog groups or anybody come back and say, you missed the ball, you missed the mark altogether. Mixing up my sports analogies, missed the mark altogether. And in fact, local groups such as like Landwatch had a lot of positive things to say about our housing element. So I'm pretty proud of what we did. I don't think we're going to see what some of those Southern California cities have seen.
Yeah, we made an honest effort.
Yeah.
That's for sure, and creative. It was an honest, creative effort, and it was a lot had to do with the public participation. So the citizens of Carmel need to be thanked. Okay,
Anybody else in
Zoom?
the room? It doesn't look like it. We have one hand raised on Zoom, Illumination Studio. If you want to, Sebastian, if you want to open up and let Illumination Studio unmute themselves, that would be great, please.
Hi, thank you. My name is Mel Alborn, and I'm a new and returning resident and property owner in Carmel. Thank you, Marnie. Thank you, Brandon, for a tremendous lot of great work, and thank you to the council members. The transparency of your process is exceptional. You may have addressed this in earlier meetings. I have one question. Could you please speak to where the water credits come over the next 8 years for these units? As a property owner, I remember very clearly being told, well, I hope you like how many sinks, et cetera, you have, because that's all you're going to have. So if you could just please speak to that, I'd appreciate it. And thank you so very much.
That is a wonderful, wonderful question that we have asked many times. So the short answer is the state doesn't care. In fact, when we have asked that question, they said, don't worry about it, just create a plan. Because remember, what we're doing here is we're creating a plan for the next 8 years. Just create a plan with the assumption that water will show up. Because there are some local efforts to create more water availability, although who knows when those will come to fruition. But that's the sad short answer, is that we don't really get to consider water in this calculation. So we could get 4 years into this plan and not a single unit could be built because there's no new water made available. no, the cease and desist order is not removed and you can't set new water meters. That's a reality of the situation. So we were just tasked by the state to come up with a plan, assuming that water will become available.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Brandon.
and a note on that, our last allocation in the fifth cycle was 31 units. 18 units were built, but they were all market rate because the only reason they were built is that people were able to afford to buy water to build those. There was no water available for affordable. So we as a community will also be looking to prioritize water as it comes online for affordable units. When and if that
When and if.
happens.
That's right, when and if.
Okay.
So thank you for the question, though.
Yeah, that was a good
Is
question.
there anybody else on Zoom?
I don't see any more hands. Last chance. If you don't know how to raise your hand, it's on your screen there in the bottom. You should be able to click a button that says raise hand. I don't see anyone on a cell phone.
And please, if you do want to go to the website, we do have a pretty extensive website on this. I think the staff did a great job on that. And
You can send comments through the website as well. We have like a chat feature basically where you can send us comments. through the
ideas,
website.
suggestions.
Absolutely.
We're open to anything. We want to. We got to get this ball over the goal line.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a requirement as we revise our housing to meet some of the more analysis that the state wants, that all of that will be presented to the public or put on the website as those revisions occur. You know, it's a work in progress, and thank you all for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. If you have any ideas that pop into your head, please don't hesitate to contact our staff. Be understanding that, like I said, it's a work in progress, and we are making a concerted effort to meet all of the requirements that the state is putting in front of us. And, you know, sometimes it's the difference between a should and a shall, or a would and a will, and so we have to sort out some of these things as well. And Marnie is doing a great job. Catherine
right,
just
yeah.
recently went on maternity leave,
She did.
but we will
Yep.
be thinking about her as we go forward. And
Speaking of ideas popping in your head, before we let everyone go, I just want to bring it back to this group if I could, because we were going to let you ask questions, get feedback from the community. I think we answered all the questions. We heard some great feedback. Is there any additional feedback from either the ad hoc committee or Councilmember Barron on what we presented tonight, or some general direction on how to approach these comments other than what we've talked about this evening?
Karen?
well, my only comment would be, when we first got the letter and I read it, I went, but how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And we are going to continue to work on this section by section. Marnie's doing a lot to clarify the questions, and then once clarified, see what work we have to do to get those answers to the state. But yeah, we're working on it, and we were happy not to get a 30-page letter.
We're indeed.
Jeff, did you have anything to add? Okay. Well, I will wrap it up with it's been a tough job, a tough task, and our nose is still to the grindstone on it. And Marnie, you've been unbelievable. I really want to say thank you to that unbelievable extra effort. The Sunday night emails that I get from you are unbelievable. Yeah. And so I know how hard you're working, and please, ask for help. We'll try to get you help. Please understand, we are trying to get you help. Brandon, thank you, and thank you everybody for coming out.
Meeting adjourned? All right.
Hi.
Recording stopped.
This is